Chapter 1. Enter the game translator. Des editor. Effidacia. It was July, and the sun was harsh and shining bright in the sky. Even though the thick curtains had been drawn shut, the vicious sunlight could not be completely blocked away. It shined through the gaps of the curtains, forming a squarish border, which was the only source of light in the room. Ring. The phone rang again. After ringing 3 times, it went to the answering machine. Kieran, this is Dr. Wong. You are 1 year away from turning 18 years old. If you don't start your genetic treatment immediately, you will lose your chance completely. Polite and official as usual. Kieran ignored the message and concentrated on the game cartridge in his hand. Bright red color, the size of a thumbnail. After he checked it, Kieran pushed the cartridge that had cost all his savings inside the virtual helmet's cartridge slot. Duck. An alert notice came out of the virtual helmet's speaker. He didn't care. There was obviously no such thing as a manufacturer or safety hazard warning when it came to an underground game. When it was first released a year ago, this game had claimed that it could achieve 100% realism. Theoretically, when a game proclaims 100% realism, it should easily be able to overtake all other games that could only achieve around 30 to 40% realism, and become an instant hit among fans. However, in this case, the game was banned before it was even released to the market. The reason? It was too real. Real enough to kill you if you died in the game itself. Out of 3,000 beta players, only 10% survived and were able to log out of the game. Counting thousands of casualties, it was decided that this game could never be released to the market. Even so, Kieran had heard some rumors about rich people wanting more excitement and investing in this game to make it work again, thus making it a true underground game that only a handful of people could access. Not even taking into account the hidden ways one had to resort to in order to purchase this game, and the extraordinary fees that one had to pay, the fact that death in this game meant death in real life was enough to make everyone stop seeking it. But Kieran did not care. Because if he did not manage to gather 3 million in medical fees within the year, considering the condition of his genetic disorder, he would die anyway. 3 million might not have been that big of a number for someone who was rich, but for Kieran, it was an unachievable sum of money. 3 years ago, when he was first diagnosed with genetic illness, he had already been working hard to make a living. But that was only a drop in the ocean for him. Kieran was only 14 years old back then, a normal Union secondary school student with no academic diplomas. Although he was young and energetic, he did not qualify for work because of his age. He could only work part-time. However, no matter what kind of part-time job he took, he still could not have afforded 3 million in medical fees. Even by working 3 jobs and getting only 5 hours of sleep a day, he could only accumulate 30,000 over the years. That was only 1% of what he needed for medical fees. He was desperate. He had so much hope, so many dreams for his life. He did not want to die. But reality was cruel. Then, at his time of despair, he heard a rumor about an underground game from the blacksmith that he was working for. The rumor said that any epic equipment could sell for millions in that game. After confirming the rumor, he decided to take a chance on it. He used his savings from 3 years of hard work and bought the underground games cartridge, ready to gamble for his life. Make it or break it, he thought to himself. He put on the helmet and lied down on the bed. His vision darkened as a line of words appeared, accompanied by a voice. Authenticating user ID. User ID confirmed. Kieran, 17, orphaned, living in a Union welfare home. Authenticating element. Underground game welcomes you. The game will begin shortly. Entering single-player dungeon. Background. War is descending upon the city. The people are not prepared for it. Most of them died in the crossfire, leaving behind civilians like you struggling to survive in the ruins of the city. Shootings scare you from time to time. The rebels and the thugs have no intention to cease fire. Their eyes are filled with rage and violence, and they want to destroy everything. Main mission. Survive for 7 days. 07th. Secondary mission. Optional. Aid civilians until the war ends. Each civilian helped can provide you with a higher rating. Hint. The beginner's dungeon is a great opportunity for every player. When all the words appeared, the game paused for about 3 minutes, allowing Kieran sufficient time to read them. Then, a blinding light struck him. Even with his eyes shut, he could still feel it hurting his pupils. He held his hands up and tried to block the light. He felt a falling sensation similar to a fast descent towards the ground. The sensation lasted for a couple of seconds. When he felt like normal again, he moved his hands away and opened his eyes. For an instant, his eyes widened. In front of his eyes, less than a meter away, lied a body with its stomach ripped open, its head slightly tilted up, and its rotten eyes staring directly at Kieran. Kieran breathed rapidly. In his life, he had never seen a human corpse before. The worst he had seen was bleeding during fights. Now, a corpse was right in front of him, and staring at its lifeless eyes was enough for him to panic in fear. Frightened, Kieran's natural instinct was to back off right away until he hit the wall behind him. Bam! The impact of his back hitting the wall caused him blinding pain. However, the pain rescued him from fear and panic, bringing him back to his senses. This is a game. This is a game. Even though it is 100% real, it is still a game. His senses allowed him to realize the kind of situation he was in. This was not a real corpse. It was just a game simulation. However, the realism in front of his eyes, the smell of blood, and the rotten smell of the body convinced him otherwise. And he needed proof to calm himself down. Character. Kieran said. During his part-time work at the blacksmiths, he had gotten quite familiar with gaming controls. Luckily, some of the rules and controls applied to every game, even to this underground one. As his voice rang out, a character attributes window that only he alone could see appeared in front of him. The character attributes window was made up of 3 columns. Name, Kieran. Age, 17, male. Race, human. Title, none. HP, 100%. Stamina, 100. Kieran scanned through the first page, which was basically the character's status and details. The second page described the character's attributes. Strength, F. Agility, F. Constitution, F. Spirit, F+. Intuition, F+. The third page included skills, equipment, and inventory, but it currently only displayed empty slots. Skills, none. Equipment, none. Inventory, empty. Rating, a newbie, totally worthless. Even though the rating at the end offended him a little, Kieran still maintained a smile on his face. If the system windows still appeared in front of him, he was undoubtedly within the game. Despite the fact that it felt 100% real. Kieran took a few deep breaths, shrugged off the remaining fear and calmed himself down. When he felt calm enough, he looked at the ripped corpse. In real life, it would surely cause him fear and panic, but in the game, the body held a different meaning, in-game currency and equipment. He had not forgotten why he had entered the underground game in the first place, earn enough money to get treatment for his genetic illness. But in order to do that, he would need to get strong enough. Only when he was strong enough would he be able to acquire more in-game money and decent equipment, and when he had enough of that, he could trade it in for money in real life. Yet now he had nothing. No skills, no equipment, an empty inventory, and low character attributes. Even his rating was rock bottom. Obviously, he did not meet the requirements yet. He would need more time to get stronger. But he did not have that much time either. He only had about a year left back in real life. But inside the game. Although he could not determine the exact time that he had, by the looks of the virtual game time, he did not appear to have a lot of extra time compared to real life. The reason why he needed to take advantage of every opportunity to make himself stronger. In front of his eyes, there lied such an opportunity. Holding back his disgust, Kieran slowly got closer to the body. Even though he knew it was just a game, the 100% realism made him feel like he was actually approaching a corpse. The stench of the dried blood made him feel really sick. Kieran avoided looking directly in the body's turbid eyes. As for its ripped stomach, he dared not even lay an eye on it. He used both his hands to search the corpse, looking around for anything. After a while, Kieran's eyes shined brightly as he tilted his head slightly, as if he had found something. He looked at the strap his left hand had latched on, pulled it out hard, and watched as a backpack fell off the body. The backpack had been hidden well, concealed by the way the body had been arranged. If Kieran had not searched carefully, it would have been hard to spot with the naked eye. It had to hold something good inside. Instinctively. Chapter 2. Backstab Translator. Des Editor. Ephidacia. The backpack in Kieran's hands was not that big. If it had been, it would not have been able to stay hidden so well inside the corpse's torso. The backpack was only the size of a normal school bag made up of 2 zip-locks and 2 pockets, which divided it into front and back. Unable to hold himself back, Kieran opened the 2 zip-locks. The contents were disappointing. 3 cans, a bottle of distilled water, and an old book. This definitely did not meet Kieran's expectations of in-game money and equipment. But then again he realized something. Even though he was in an 100% realism underground game, some game rules still applied, and he was currently in the first dungeon, which according to any normal game guidelines basically meant he was in Beginner's Village. Obviously, it was not possible to get good equipment in Beginner's Village. He exhaled and went on to check what he had acquired. Name. Gant type, food rarity, common attributes, recovers 25 HP and 50 stamina within 1 minute, effect, none, able to bring outside of the dungeon, yes, remark, it can prevent you from starving. Tastes better when served hot. Ellipsis. Name, distilled water type, food rarity, common attributes, recovers 10 HP and 20 stamina within 1 minute, effect, none, able to bring outside of the dungeon, yes, remark, it has more uses than you might think. As Kieran's finger touched the can and the bottle of distilled water, all this information popped up in his vision. It didn't make much of a difference since he already knew most of it. He turned his attention to the old book. When he touched it, a message window popped up. Name, Dell's Diary. Type, book rarity, damaged attributes, none, effect, none, able to bring outside of the dungeon, no, remark, it's true, the guy just took random notes in a book. You can still try to read it though. Kieran subconsciously flipped the old book open. The handwriting was rough and messy, and a lot of the pages were covered in dirt, which basically rendered it unreadable. Thus, the whole diary's contents were hard to make out. October 21st, cloudy. The war has been going on for 4 months. Food, water and medicine are running out. Guns are fired occasionally. Luckily, the rebels have stopped searching day and night. Their routine now is to just patrol during the day and then return to their base. The worst ones are the thugs, who only raid at night, coming through like locusts and robbing everything in sight. October 27th, sunny. Damn it, I've been robbed by a thug. The only canned food and water I had left is all gone, taken away by that scoundrel. What should I do now? October 29th, cloudy. No, I cannot continue to wait for a miracle. I need to do something while I still have the strength to. November 1st, sunny. Ha ha ha, luck is really on my side. I've hit the jackpot. Not only have I found food, I have even found weapons. Please refer to me as Dell the Lucky from now on. November 11th, sunny. Dell the Lucky is going out again. This time will be fruitful as well. Ellipsis. The diary stopped there abruptly. Obviously, the guy had not been as lucky as he thought he was. Kieran looked at the corpse again. Although it was still hard to look at, he did not turn away. That unorganized, messy diary, other than providing some basic information for Kieran, also provided a clue. There had to be a weapon inside the body in front of him. For someone as unarmed as Kieran was, a weapon was necessary in order to survive. At least it would give him some sense of security and a chance of survival. Judging by what he had read in the diary, it was not safe around that area. It would not be an easy task to survive there for 7 days. Hope is not lost. Holding that thought in his head, he extended his hands again, searching around the body once more. This time he was more careful, more thorough than last time. The sticky, dried blood was all over his hands. It made Kieran sick to his stomach, but if he was able to find something, then it would all be worth it. Name, dagger. Type, sharp weapon. Rarity, damaged, attack, weak attributes, none, effect, none, able to bring outside of the dungeon, yes, remark, lacks maintenance. If possible, you can try polishing and oiling it. Ellipsis. Name, lighter. Type, miscellaneous. Rarity, damaged, effect, none, remark, do you really need an introduction? The dagger was well hidden under the waist area, covered by the corpse's shirt, and if it weren't for Kieran's thorough search, it would not have been discovered. As for the lighter, it was found inside the body's pants pocket. Lifting the rusty dagger, Kieran rolled the lighter's disc. After a few rounds, a spark appeared. Under the spark from the lighter, Kieran could clearly see what was on the rusty dagger. It was not just rust. It was also coated with a red substance. What was that? Having read the diary, Kieran knew perfectly well what it was. The people that were trapped in this city facing famine had lost their daily order and become dangerous. When facing the rebels, they were plain civilians that could not retaliate, but when facing each other, they became thugs and raiders. Just like the corpse in front of Kieran. He looked at the corpse again, turned to the canned food and bottle of water, then glanced back inside the backpack before putting it on his back. He kept the lighter in his shirt pocket. Before he entered the dungeon in front of him, his clothes had already started resembling the clothes of the civilians living in the city. Dirty, but luckily not damaged. Dagger in hand, Kieran prepared to leave. The empty room held no more reason for him to stay. Through the tightly sealed window's gap, the sunlight that pierced through slowly faded away, making Kieran's retreating footsteps quicker. When the night fell, the thugs would come out. Kieran did not plan to face a group of thugs heads on, so he would not stay in this room that was giving away his presence. Any house would eventually become a raiding target. The drain or the sewers would be a much better hiding place. Kieran was thinking where he should stop. It did not have to be a comfortable place, just a big enough place for him to hide. The underground could shield him from people's eyes, so it seemed like it would be the best choice. Of course, someone else might be hiding there. However, compared to the raiding thugs outside, the way Kieran saw it, the people hiding underground would be much safer to be with. Pushing the door open, Kieran found a corridor, and at the end of the corridor another open room which was completely empty. Someone had already taken everything that had been inside it. He walked through the wide empty room that led outside of the house. Just when Kieran was about to step out, bang! The door that led outside was forced open. A shadowed figure fell on the floor and a second shadowed figure emerged, laughing deeply. As the door was forced open, Kieran retreated back into the room quickly, holding the dagger tightly in his hand and listening carefully. Ha ha, look at that. Who would have thought it'd be a woman? Clear excitement, accompanied by that cruel laugh. Scram. A rough compelling voice, followed by a shaking sound. Kieran pictured the figure using both its arms and body to fall back on the floor and back away from the threat. Suddenly, Kieran's face fell. The voice was getting clearer and clearer as the figures seemed to be approaching him while they were speaking. At the end of the corridor, there was a second room besides the one that Kieran was hiding in. Once they reached the end, they would have to enter one of the rooms, either the room that Kieran was in, or the empty room on the other side. It was a 50-50 chance. Kieran held onto his dagger so tightly that he began to sweat. They were close. Closer. Kieran gulped down anxiously. His unease could not change the reality before him. When the fallen figure backed up and reached the room that Kieran was in, he could not draw another breath. The fallen figure, who was retreating using both hands, seemed stunned as well. After all, who would have thought that there would be another person in the room? But the next moment, the figure came back to its senses. As it kept retreating, its eyes did not linger on Kieran, let alone ask him for help. It startled Kieran quite a bit. As the footsteps kept coming closer, Kieran quickly sobered up. The person in front of him might not have been dangerous, but the one following them definitely was. If that person discovered him, they would definitely end up in a fight. And a fight like this would eventually end up in a massacre. Kieran knew really well what he was capable of. He was not strong enough, nor did he have any fighting skills compared to a thug who had survived 4 months in a war. But there was still a chance. Kieran looked at the fallen lady who was backing up. She looked calm, but there was strong intention in her eyes, one that made Kieran understand. He held his breath and hid deeper in the shadows. The leather shoes stepping on the ground made a strong, clear noise. It sounded like a beast hunting its prey while at the same time trying to display its dominance. Don't come any closer. The lady on the ground shrunk towards the corner, her coarse voice showing a hint of despair. This seemed to excite the pursuer even more. He had not noticed that there was another person in the room, because his eyes were locked on the lady. As the pursuer inspected his prey, his back was totally exposed to Kieran. Kieran has been holding his breath while the man approached. He did not hesitate. He slowly picked up the dagger and stabbed the man fiercely. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3. Skill Translator. Des Editor. Ephidesha. Kiran stabbed fiercely at the pursuer's back, but the dagger only went halfway in. Blood oozed out from the wound instantly. Ah! The pursuer let out a scream and his body moved forward on its own. Kiran followed his movement, his left hand pressing down even more on his right hand, which was the one holding the dagger. He pressed down with all his might, but the dagger did not seem to move in any further. Oh no, it's struck a bone. Kiran was alarmed, and instinctively pulled out the dagger. Fresh warm blood gushed out and spilled all over his face, blinding his eyes. His vision temporarily compromised, he panicked and started to wield the dagger all over the place. In that moment, his only thought was that he should not give the pursuer any breathing space, or else he'd be the one who would end up dead. With that thought in mind, Kiran quickened his wielding pace. The sound of metal cutting through flesh became the only sound in the room. After wielding the dagger around numerous times, Kiran finally figured out how to use it properly. Blindly slicing around would only inflict a flesh wound on his target. He should be in a stabbing stance instead. What he had to do was avoid the man's skeleton and go for his soft spots, which were his flesh and muscles. His body moved naturally toward his target. Soon he regained part of his vision and adjusted his grip on the dagger. He found that if he used his elbow right, the dagger lunged out as if it were tied on a spring. Bam! The whole body of the dagger entered the pursuer's chest. The pursuer, who was about to counter-attack him with the kitchen knife in his hand, collapsed, his eyes staring at his chest and the dagger that was lodged deep inside, with an incredulous look on his face. To his death, the pursuer could not comprehend how a seemingly harmless fellow could have become such a lethal killer. In just one instant, Kiran felt the same way. He was completely puzzled. As he stared at the dying man, the smell of the man's blood reminded him of what he had just done. As he faced the very real-looking corpse, the bright red blood stimulated his senses. The fact that he had killed the pursuer with his own hands made him so sick that his stomach turned, and he vomited. When he was done, Kiran fell to the ground, weak and empty of any energy. Tears and snot covered his face, making him look silly and messy. Are you done yet? The coarse voice next to his ear made him lift his head instinctively. He saw a face covered with ashes and dirt. The woman's gray eyes were cold and alert. The loot is yours, I won't fight for it. Kiran wanted to say something, but she cut him off. She stuck to the wall, and slowly moved towards the door while staring at Kiran. She did not trust him. She would not let her guard down. Watching her actions, Kiran realized something, and that realization stopped him from saying anything or making any further movement. He was afraid that she would misunderstand and cause him unwanted trouble. Kiran silently let her get out of his line of sight. When she disappeared completely, he felt relieved and stood up, using his hand for support. She looked cold, but she was kind. Kiran exclaimed with a sigh. Despite the lack of law and order, she did not take advantage of him. She might have been cold and worried, but she could still be considered a kind person. And she was at least 10 times better than the thugs. Kiran looked at the system window. Acquired skill, sharp weapon, dagger, basic. It was that skill that turned him from a total newbie into a highly skilled dagger user, one able to kill his opponent with one hit. Curious about the skills window, Kiran decided to check the battle log as well. Stabbing inflicts 15 damage to opponent. Wielding inflicts 3 damage to opponent. Wielding inflicts 2 damage to opponent. Causes bleeding. 3 effective hits. Acquired skill, sharp weapon, dagger, basic. Stabbing, lethal attack. Inflicts 80 damage to opponent, 40 sharp weapon, dagger, basic, x2, opponent dies. Remark, weak point equals true damage x2, 3 effective hits. Kiran mumbled to himself, before flipping to the skills window. It used to be empty before, but now a skill had been entered in the first column, reading, sharp weapon, dagger, basic. Kiran focused on the skill description, which only he alone could see. Name, sharp weapon, dagger, basic. Attributes, strength, agility, constitution, skill type, offensive, effect, dagger mastery, increased damage inflicted by 10%. Consumes, stamina, learning requirement, strength F, agility F, constitution F. Remark, this is only the beginning, don't push yourself. Increased damage inflicted by 10%. Kiran looked at the description and subconsciously compared it to the battle log from the previous fight. Then he moved quickly to the man's body and pulled out the dagger that was fully submerged in his chest. When he held the dagger in his hand, that familiar feeling rose again from the bottom of his heart, and he plunged the dagger in again. It felt like he had practiced that move 1,000 times, or even 10,000. The sound of sharp metal tearing through thin air could be heard in the room. Without the slightest tremble. In his palm, Kieran accurately stabbed in the chest the imaginary enemy before him. The whole stabbing experience was no different from the fight that had cost the man his life. He was precise, fast, relentless. This is just 10%. And I achieved this by effectively hitting him 3 times, Kieran mumbled incoherently. He couldn't conceive this. It was hard to imagine that only 10% increase in power could make such a huge difference. The 10% increase in power provided Kieran with a combination of strength, agility and experience, which would not be possible to achieve without a long period of practice. He had only made 3 effective hits, and he could already beat people who had had years of practice. Kieran did not think of himself as talented, or thought he could be considered a genius. However, given the circumstances, even a real talented genius could not have achieved such a feat. Kieran gave it some thought. Then an idea popped in his head. The hint. He remembered the hint that was given to him when he first entered the game. He quickly checked the system record log, looking for it. Main mission. Survive 7 days, 07th, secondary mission, optional, aid civilians until the war ends. Each civilian helped can provide you with a higher rating. Hint. The beginner's dungeon is a golden opportunity for every player. The game hint could be seen clearly below the main mission and secondary mission. He paused at the words, golden opportunity. He took a long breath, then exhaled. Although the game is 100% realistic, some rules still apply. The system will not let a newbie start in an extremely dangerous situation, but will get progressively harder. As long as the opportunity presented is fully utilized, all danger and obstacles can be overcome, Kieran thought to himself. However, after some thought, he frowned at the conclusion that he reached. He wondered what would have happened to him if he hadn't thoroughly searched the corpse he'd come across and acquired a weapon for himself. The possibilities scared him. So this is the underground game that only 10% of beta players survived. I guess a number of them must have died so early on because of their carelessness and inability to adapt to the situation. The thoughts crawled inside Kieran's head while he turned to the body in front of him for a last inspection. His face looked dead serious. When he looked at the battle log, there was no mention of experience points, XP, or even an experience gauge, even after he had killed the pursuer. However, he had acquired a skill, one that was marked as basic. Judging by his previous online game experience, this was a dungeon-based level, and he would not gain any XP while he was still going through it, but only when he had successfully cleared it. That was when he would be given a rating for his performance. That rating would be determined by his loot and growth. But how could he achieve a higher rating? Excluding the mission requirements for the main quest itself, everything else would be based on his performance in the game. From what he understood, games usually required players to kill monsters, acquire equipment and money, and so on. Although he did not currently know much about the secondary mission, he was extremely familiar with usual gaming routines, killing monsters, acquiring equipments, treasure, etc. After all, he had just searched a dead body, and now there was another one before his eyes, the latter one that he had killed himself. The stimulating smell of blood still stung his nose. Although he had just killed someone, Kieran was still disgusted by the smell, but also getting kind of used to it. At least he was not throwing up anymore, and his heart held less fear and panic. The first thing Kieran picked up was the knife in the dead man's hand. Name: Butcher knife. Type: sharp weapon. Rarity: damaged, attack, weak. Attributes: none. Effect: none. Able to bring out of the dungeon. Yes. Remark: a normal household butcher knife used for slicing vegetables, or someone else's hand. The moment Kieran picked up the knife, the information appeared in front of his eyes. After inspecting it, he putted the knife away in his backpack and continued his search. Soon enough, he made another discovery. Chapter 4, Gunshot Translator, Des Editor, Ephidacia. A half-empty pack of cigarettes fell into in Kieran's hands. Name: cigarettes. Type: miscellaneous. Rarity: common. Attribute: has a small effect on fear and anxiety. Effect. None able to bring out of dungeon. Yes, remark. In face of true fear or panic, it's better than nothing. Next to the pack of cigarettes, there was also another lighter. The look and details of the newly found lighter were exactly the same as the previous ones that Kieran had acquired. Looking at the cigarettes in his hands, Kieran put them in his shirt's pocket along with the new lighter. He was not a smoker. Firstly, because of his health, and secondly because thanks to his financial problems he could not afford to be. His genetic illness and the fact that a pack of cigarettes cost as much as 2 meals in the real world were enough to make him keep his distance. However, within the game, he would not mind smoking. Of course, now was not the time. Kieran bent down and searched the body carefully once more. When he made sure that there were no other valuables to obtain, he left. It was already nightfall, and Kieran did not want to stay in a house that attracted this much attention, waiting for the thugs to come and raid it. He needed to find a more secluded, safer place to hide in and think about what his next move would be. After walking down the empty corridor and living room, Kieran came to previous ones that Kieran had acquired. Looking at the cigarettes in his hands, Kieran put them in his shirt's pocket along with the new lighter. He was not a smoker. Firstly, because of his health, and secondly because thanks to his financial problems he could not afford to be. His genetic illness and the fact that a pack of cigarettes cost as much as 2 meals in the real world were enough to make him keep his distance. However, within the game, he would not mind smoking. Of course, now was not the time. Kieran bent down and searched the body carefully once more. When he made sure that there were no other valuables to obtain, he left. It was already nightfall, and Kieran did not want to stay in a house that attracted this much attention, waiting for the thugs to come and raid it. He needed to find a more secluded, safer place to hide in and think about what his next move would be. After walking down the empty corridor and living room, Kieran came to a stop beside the door that led outside. He took a look, his head leaning out and inspecting what was waiting for him there. All he could see were fallen buildings, debris, and stones scattered everywhere. They looked like abandoned ruins. Kieran assessed the place in his head. After confirming that no one was around, he crouched down forward, leaving the house and taking tiny steps outside. He soon reached a demolished wall. It seemed to be the bearing wall of a building or a house. Judging by its length, it must have been an at least 3-floor-high building. All that was left behind now was a torn-down wall the height of a child, some stones, bricks, and a few pieces of old wood. Kieran stayed under its shade and inspected his surroundings. Everything might already have been in ruins, but judging by the building placement and structure, Kieran concluded that this had been a residential area, and a high-end, rich one at that. At a residential area like this, there must have been sewers, a drain system, maybe even some kind of underground space. That was good news for Kieran, because it meant that he would not need to face any more survivors for the time being. Given the fact that any survivors might turn out to be thugs, Kieran thought that it would be best to avoid them for as long as possible. He hunched down and continued to move forward. He was looking for the entrance to the sewers and, through them, to the underground. That he was sure existed. The search lasted for about 30 minutes, and within the time Kieran managed to find 2 sewage entrances. The bad news was that the first one was buried under a pile of debris. Although he could clearly see the entrance, it was still blocked and impossible to open and squeeze inside. In order to do that, he wouldn't just need to clear all the debris lying on top of it, but he'd also need to do so in total silence. Any noise would only attract other survivors and thugs, who would come for him. He could see at least 2 armed men patrolling around that area. They had not spotted him yet, and he had no intention of attracting their attention and taking on both of them. Kieran hid carefully from the patrollers, and waited for them to leave so he could continue his search. Moving on with it, he eventually reached the second sewage entrance, only to find out that it also presented the same problem as the first one. More than that, another problem arose that was even bigger than the first one. Kieran came upon 2 Pai Omicron Pli confronting each other. One of them was holding a wooden stick, while the other one was holding a steel rod with a mass of concrete on its end. The sewage entrance that Kieran had located was between the 2 of them. It seemed that his sudden appearance had not captured their attention though, not because Kieran was moving particularly quietly, but because both of them were focused solely on each other and did not pay any attention to him. Kieran frowned as he looked at them. He did not plan on interfering, nor did he intend to take any advantage of them. Unless one of them could quietly knock out the other, or kill one another, their screaming would definitely attract a lot of unwanted attention in a wide area like that. If the time came, Kieran might have to face not only one or two people, but a whole group of armed thugs. Could one of them really silently take out the other? Even in that scenario, Kieran would have to be very lucky to be able to get away. After all, if one of them were able to kill the other in a confrontation like this, then that person would not be an easy target. Kieran thought about it and came up with a solution. He crouched down while keeping them in sight, and slowly moved backwards. He tried hard to move quietly so that he would not attract their attention, but all his effort went down the drain when he accidentally stepped on a plank. Crack. The clear breaking sound made him freeze on the spot. Damn it. Kieran cursed silently. He had not remembered that there had been a plank on the way he had come, but now nothing he said would be useful. The two confronters had already turned their eyes toward the source of the sound. They had raised their guard, clearly wondering what was going on. Kieran didn't want the situation to get any worse, so he came out of his hiding place, holding both his hands up and signaling that he was harmless. "It's you," exclaimed one of them suddenly with a coarse voice. Kieran instantly knew who that was. It was the woman that he had met back in the house. When she spoke, the person holding the steel rod backed up quickly. Like Kieran, they obviously did not want to take on both of them either. They had no other source of information other than the lady's words, but those seemed enough to let them know that Kieran and the lady knew each other. And that was a sufficient reason for them to leave. Kieran shrugged as he watched it all unfold. He was 80% sure that the lady had spoken on purpose, using him to solve the problem at hand. Just like back in the house, the lady was the first to become aware of Kieran's presence. In order to effectively to take out her pursuer, she had not spoken up. Instead, she had taken the lead and acted even more scared so that she could lure the pursuer into her trap. This was obviously a really smart lady, and Kieran did not want to get on her bad side. Plus, she had shown a small act of kindness back there. He thought that she was a person worth talking to. Kieran wouldn't mind trading what few things he had in exchange for some valuable information from her. Bang. A loud gunshot cut Kieran off before he could even finish his sentence. The guy who had just backed off had been shot. His head had exploded like a watermelon ran over by a car, splashing all over the place. At the same moment, two people stepped forward from the darkness with a chilling smile on their faces. Kieran looked at the headless body on the ground, then back at the two shooters. His whole body shivered and he quickly retreated to the wall behind him, hiding himself from their line of fire. Damn it. The lady hid behind the same wall. When they started firing again, she began to curse non-stop. Son of a bitch. Why would the vulture's men show up here? Kieran could clearly sense fear and hatred under her ash-covered face. Vulture. Kieran mumbled the word under his breath. Of course he knew that it was not the bird that she was referring to, but a sort of title. Any person with such a title did not sound like a nice person. In the animal kingdom, vultures were notorious for preying on corpses and feeding on their dead meat. If someone held such a title, unconsciously, Kieran thought of the fallen headless body. And his own body stiffened up. Calm down. Calm down. Kieran told himself. Then he pulled out the butcher's knife and handed it over to the lady beside him. An ally would be useful at a time like this, and the butcher's knife was much powerful than the wooden stick she was holding in her hand. The lady understood Kieran's intention and accepted the knife eagerly. She held onto it tightly, her eyes set in a steadfast glare. After surviving 4 months in a war, she had been through enough. She knew what to do. Diversion and attack, she said. Diversion. Attack. Kieran asked, scared. Obviously, a diversion would be a huge risk. One misstep meant certain death. And Kieran sure did not want to die like this. He didn't agree with that suggestion, but before he could voice his disagreement, the lady went on explaining her plan. I'll go lead them off. You are good with the dagger and I'm good at evading, this is the best strategy. As she finished her thought, footsteps began to sound out near them, completely ignoring them both. Don't kill me. Without hesitation, a coarse feminine voice escaped her mouth. Then she ran back towards the ruins. Chapter 5. Ambush Translator. Des editor, Efidacia. Kieran was stunned as he watched her rush out. When she had suggested diversion and attack as a strategy, Kieran had secretly thought that she would ask him to be the live bait. Against all his expectations, it was she that took on the high-risk part of the plan and rushed out there bravely. Ha ha ha, look what have we here. The ladies' scream and the shooter's laughter snapped Kieran out of it. His strong morals did not allow him to try to escape, but that did not mean that he would let this opportunity pass either. Kieran leapt out from his hiding spot, holding the dagger tightly in his hand. The two shooters walked in his line of sight. The two of them stood in a front-to-back formation. The one in front looked completely distracted by the ladies screaming, but the one in the back was keeping an eye out on their surroundings. When Kieran jumped out from his hiding spot, the one in the back saw him and pointed a gun at him, ready to fire. *T. At the sight of the gun, Kieran felt his heart freeze. He knew very well that he was not bulletproof, and the man stood barely 3 meters away from him. The distance was short, but still long enough to make it impossible for Kieran to stop him from firing. It was checkmate. Kieran could smell his own fear. The cold sent chills down his spine, but he felt a warm sensation burning up in his body, rising up like boiling water. It was his will to survive. It was that will that kept him alive in the real world, working hard to pay his medical bills, and not giving up in the face of the harsh reality. He was not going to give up now either. Kieran did not stop. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the two armed men. His heart beat faster and faster, fighting to give him a chance at survival. One of the men laughed. His laugh was full of contempt and irony. He had seen too many people fighting for their lives. Had even killed a bunch of them. The number was starting to get so big that he had lost count of how many people exactly he had killed. But never mind that. He was going to add that guy in front of him to that number. The man stuck out his tongue and licked his lips in excitement, looking completely disgusting as he prepared to pull the trigger. However, in that very moment, Kieran took a big leap to the right. The thug instinctively followed his movement, but his partner was blocking his line of sight. The thug was caught off guard. Now, Kieran dashed out with exploding speed. He lunged towards the first thug, whose attention was focused on the lady. The dagger in his hand flew, avoiding the target's rib bones and stabbing him right in the heart. Stabbing, lethal attack, inflicts 100 damage to HP, 50 sharp weapon, dagger basic, X2, target dies. Phew. When he removed the dagger, hot bright red blood flowed out. The blood splattered on his face once more, but after his previous experience, this time he was smart enough to close his eyes while removing the dagger. Kieran did not stop when the man was down. He was well aware that the real enemy was the one behind him. Arg! Kieran let out a loud scream and used all his strength to grab the dead body in front of him. Using it as a human shield, he lifted it and rushed towards the remaining enemy. Bam! With a deafening sound, Kieran, his human shield and the remaining thug fell to the ground. The human shield landed on the thug and pressed down on him, while Kieran fell to the side. Kieran quickly got back up and lunged towards his enemy. When the thug sensed the approaching danger, he struggled to get up. However, the dead body on top of him was heavier than he'd expected, and Kieran had already reached him before he could push it off. Kieran showed no mercy. He added his own weight on top of the dead body, pressing down on the thug even more and making him struggle even harder. He used the dagger in his palm to stab the thug's right hand. The gun, the thug's biggest weapon and Kieran's greatest concern. Bam! The tip of the blade penetrated the thug's right wrist, plunging the whole way through. Arg! While he screamed, the thug let go of his gun and slided it aside. Kieran did not stop, though. He turned and aimed his dagger towards the man's upper body and neck. Considering his chest was currently covered by a dead body, his neck was the only other viable option. Bam! The dagger pierced through the man's throat, silencing him in the process. Tackling. Inflicts 2 damage to HP, stuns for 1 second. Stabbing. Inflicts 12 damage to HP, cripples target. Stabbing. Lethal attack, inflicts 86 damage to HP, 43 sharp weapon, dagger basic, X2. Target dies. When the battle log popped up, Kieran squatted down on the ground and took several deep breaths. The whole battle had not lasted longer than 5 seconds, but it had consumed a great amount of Kieran's energy and concentration. He had taken advantage of their formation and killed them both, one after the other. Kieran had done his best every time, and as a result both of the thugs were dead. Kieran starting seeing stars, and his vision darkened. A fainting sensation came over him and made him lie down on the ground. Despite the stinging smell of blood, he did not move. Besides, he was beginning to get used to the smell. It's a scary thing to get used to. Kieran laughed ironically. He had no choice. It was a life and death situation. He kept smiling as he looked at the attributes window. Stamina, 20. His stamina had dropped from 100 to 20 during the battle. However, as he kept taking deep breaths, he was recovering by 1 percentage point per second. After a short rest, Kieran was able to stand up again. He quickly searched the body in front of him for potential loot. Name: M1905 Type: Gun. Rarity: Damaged. Attack: Normal. Magazine: 7 rounds. Attributes: None. Effect: None. Able to bring outside of the dungeon. Yes. Remark: This is a 11mm handgun that has not been maintained well. Beware of jamming bullets. Ellipsis. Name: Bullet. Type: Ammunition. Rarity: Common. Attributes: None. Effect: None. Able to bring outside of dungeon. Yes. Remark: Rounds for 11mm handgun. Potent handgun bullets. Ellipsis. Dot. 2 M1905 handguns and 6 rounds of bullets. Was the best that Kieran could find. Apart from those, there was nothing else worth carrying. Holding the M1905 in his hand, Kieran felt an increased sense of security. He turned and looked back. It's clear, he said. He rushed towards the lady, who had not been far behind him, to let her know that the coast was clear. The lady, however, did not come forward to meet him. Surviving 4 months in the war hadn't just made her vigilant, but also very smart. When she had taken on the task of diverting the enemy, she'd had more reasons than the ones she'd shared with him. She was aware that if she had asked Kieran to create a diversion, the barely formed alliance between them would have broken and they would both have been killed by the thugs. Kieran understood her reasoning. That was why he wanted to talk to her and, if possible, work with her as a team. He liked to work with smart people. Of course, he would have to be honest in order to persuade her. You know, we've come across each other twice and we've teamed up both times. I think we can work together to survive the gloomy days that lie ahead. When the lady hesitated to let her guard down, Kieran holstered both of the guns on his waist and put his hands up. He wanted to show her that he meant no harm. His words also helped move the lady a little. After a few seconds, she came over. I did my part too. I want a share of the loot, she said. Sure, of course, Kieran nodded. Acknowledging her contribution. She did deserve most of the credit after all. If it hadn't been for her diversion, which had distracted one of the thugs, no matter how hard Kieran had tried, he would not have been able to escape both of the men. Therefore, Kieran did not mind sharing the loot with her. He was planning on handing her one of the M1905 handguns when, out of the blue, she ran over to the headless body. Kieran was startled, but came back to his senses quick. That confrontation had definitely not been a coincidence. There must have been a reason behind it. Kieran fought his curiosity. He had promised that he would share the loot with her, and he would keep that promise. Standing in place, he kept an eye out for danger while he waited for the lady to finish her search. After a while, she returned with a backpack. I think we need a hiding place, it's not safe here. Kieran said. The gunshots must certainly have attracted unwanted attention. 2. Be honest, Kieran already felt eyes trained on him and his belongings. Despite the gunshots, people would still come over to check, and it would definitely not be harmless civilians. He might have 2 handguns on him, but he only had 6 rounds of bullets, and he did not feel like facing an unknown number of enemies just yet. Follow me, the lady said, signaling to Kieran. Considering she had lived around the city for 4 months, she was much more familiar with the terrain than he was, and she knew a lot better what were they facing up against. The battles themselves were not that frightening, but it was the idea of the unwanted, continuous, endless fighting that seemed downright terrifying. In order to avoid that, he would have to end each battle as soon as possible, and leave the scene fast once the fighting was over. Trailing behind the lady, Kieran ran and zigzagged despite the blisters on his foot. He did not stop for a second. After running for about 20 minutes, they reached another pile of ruins. As the lady came to a stop, so did Kieran, instinctively looking around him. He could not see anything alarming. The ruins before them looked almost identical to the ones they had just left. Collapsed walls, stone debris, broken wood. But Kieran was sure of one thing. While they had been running, the sounds behind them had gotten further and further away. They had shaken off the people who had been watching them. He was safe. For now.